Oh no. For this video, I'm gonna have to explain Canadianisms. And even worse, Quebecisms. Today's subject for Christmas Movie A Day is going to be The Dog Who Stopped the War. And that's the only time I'm going to say the English language title because it is completely different from the French one. This is a Quebec film that came out in 1984. It was a huge hit and is one that if you're my age, especially if you're French, you probably saw 100 to 1,000 times because it was, in an honest way, forced down our throats in school. If there was a moment where there needed to be time to be filled, they would reach for something like The Dog Who Stopped the War or The Peanut Butter Solution, and they would put it on. But before I get to how pervasive it was in my childhood, I want to talk about the movie itself, because if you're in America, you may not know what it is, and you may not know its original title, La Guerre des Tuques. If I'm going to translate that literally, and some places in the world did try, I believe it was called the Snowball War somewhere else, but that's not really what it means. So, La Guerre, that's easy, the war, of, Tuques. Now, Tuques is a word that actually has an English translation that's very easy. Tuque. This thing, the hat that every Canadian puts on, especially when you're a kid, if it's cold outside. Goes over, you flip up the brim, and you pull it over your ears, and ta-da, you are in full Canadian gear. La Guerre des Tuques makes sense because every kid that would be going outside playing has to wear a tuque. You're not going without a hat. That's madness. And tuque is also something that is usually associated with children. I'm not sure if you still call things tuque when you're older. If you're reaching for your hat, you just call it a chapeau, which is a hat in English, or do you continue to call it tuque or toque? I mean, it is a big Canadianism, but it is something that I often associate with being a child, and something that like kind of goes away when you become more of an adult. And you would just say, hey, can you grab my hat before I go outside? And even wearing one of these, if you're Canadian and like past schooling, is probably a no-no. You'd want to either go no hat or with something a little bit more stylish. I mean, there's nothing more stylish than a Canadian hat. Never forget that. And so La Guerre des Tuques, why is it a classic in the Canadian kind of filmography, if you will, or Quebec filmography? Okay, I cannot get into Quebec, Canada relations and the big complex mess that there is there, so I will just leave you to look into it, and for the rest of this, I will be using Canadian and Quebec basically as the same. I know, please, don't write any angry comments. I understand. I am French-Canadian. Technically, I'm not Quebecois. I'm actually Franco-Ontarian, which is different, but I understand! La Guerre des Tuques became really popular because I think it tapped into a feeling and a vibe that no kids cinema really had done up to that point, especially in Canada. Canadian winters, being a kid in Canada, you know, especially pre kind of 2000, is defined by going out, playing with your friends, building snow forts, building slides, building things that are really dangerous, and getting into snowball fights. And La Guerre des Tuques not only captured that, but it captured it in a way that could only come out of the historical path that Canadian cinema took, because for the longest time, Canada has been defined as a place that kind of looks down on narrative cinema, that looked at it and go, yeah, you know, that is entertainment and childish. And with things like the National Film Board, when it was formulated, was really to bring a kind of realism, a documentary grit to the art of cinema, if you will. And for the longest time, the National Film Board in Canada, which is the big governing film organization when it comes to creating things, that was documentaries. And it was only through a bunch of people in Quebec, in the rest of Canada, who started to push the form and do different things with it. Not only capturing realism, but also bringing a few kind of, you know, surreal touches within that realism. And by heightening it, you get something that feels closer to the audience, because that's how we kind of perceive the world, especially when you're kids. Cannot get into the history of Canadian cinema here, or the way that some of the big narrative films that were made in Canada were only done by people that were working for the National Film Board and lying about what they were doing and then showing up with a narrative picture, or people that made films and then, you know, Canada kind of dismissed it, but if it won an award in the United States, everyone was like, oh yeah, you know what? No, yeah, it is a CanCon classic. La Guerre des Tuques is one of the rare films that was a commercial success in Canada. And it comes out of a whole wave of films that was called Tales for All, or Les Contes pour Tous. It was a big wave of movies in like the 80s and 90s. I cannot go into the history of it. I just need to say that, like, I don't know what deal they had with schools, especially with French schools. They all had them. everyone that I speak to who's around my age, mid 30s to late 30s, has seen these movies because they must have gotten in the classrooms or they got in the libraries and they just played nonstop, especially on television, because in Canada, we had great laws that forced stations to play Canadian content. So there would be a kind of like monolithic experience of Canadian stuff because the channels had to show them, which has very much lessened in the streaming era, which really bums me out. But back then, everybody saw this movie. And the movie itself, you may be wondering, wait, Justin, you're not talking, you're giving a lot of historical context around it. I think it's because it is so simple. The movie is just about a bunch of kids, all of them non-actors, cast for the first time in this movie. I think the majority of them never acted again. So there is that purity and simplicity that during the winter break, they decide, let's have a big snow war. We're going to break apart. We're going to build forts. It's going to get big and complicated. And that's it. The conflict is completely fabricated. I mean, let's be honest, aren't all conflicts fabricated at the end of the day? And it's just about the fight that goes on between all these people. When you hear that, I think you probably picture something like Snow Day, for example, like very exaggerated Nickelodeon, like the style is pushed to the limit. Then you gotta remember, this is 1984. We are coming out of like La Cinema Vérité wave that was going through the NFB. Oh, I should have said like a lot of the innovations in Canadian cinema actually came out of the French Quebec wing, which was the ONF, which was the Office National du Film du Canada, which is its separate branch, but it's all under the same governmental umbrella. Please don't come after me. I know, it's so complicated. There is this kind of, we're coming out of a documentary tradition and we're then capturing kids and we're to capture them feel real. Like the thing about La Guerre des Tuques is it does escalate as it goes. It gets a little bit wackier. They build big forts with, big wacky things. It is at the end of the day a parable about like war and how it can separate you and create conflicts. So there is some like heavy subject matter, especially when you look at the director of the film. Most of his stuff is not kids things, except for the ones that he made for this film series that I mentioned. And so you get this like, this is what it felt to be a kid in Canada. So when it came out, I think it was just a reflection of what kids during that time experienced or their parents saw. It also takes place in a small town, like basically fields of snow with little pockets of houses. This is like literally a small town, kind of where I grew up as well. If I went over to my friends' places, that's what it looked like. A lot of them that lived on farms or lived on little houses that were just surrounded by fields that, you had nothing else to do. So you just had to play. And so this is what this whole movie is about. It's about play. It's about how play escalates. It's about how play gets dangerous. And then, okay, trigger warning for people who heard me say the title at the beginning, because I think something that a lot of people remember about this film, how does a dog stop a war? I think you can probably guess what that is. It's almost as if the English language distributors were trying to give a warning. They're like, we told you in the title what this means. While the French ones are like, La Guerre des Tuques, the War of Tuques. Isn't that fun? So like there is, after all this kind of like, we're seeing ourselves on screen, and then it's all about play, reality kind of crushes right at the end of the movie and leaves not a sour taste, I think, in the audience's mouth, but a bittersweet one. And I think that's what kept people coming back again and again. And I think the film has stayed in public consciousness, not just because for a long time, legally, you had to show it because you needed to fill time. And what better thing to show that's Canadian during Christmas than something that takes place during the Christmas break, but also that like when people got older, it wasn't about they're being reflected, but them looking back at something that doesn't really exist anymore. If you look on YouTube, any clip from this movie has tons of things, which is like, I remember this is how we used to play. We used to go outside, and now we live in the big city. Now we have our phones, etc., etc. So it is a snapshot of that feels more real than you would expect for a kid's film, because all the people that are making it, they've never really made kids films. So they're just trying to make a film that speaks to them, and by consequence, it's something that would never be made ever again. Like, there was a CGI remake of this movie, and you can imagine how wacky that would be, because those kind of techniques would be frowned upon by anybody in an executive position making decisions about what should be done. So like La Guerre des Tuques is one of those like great Canadian movies as it's representative of what came before and what could be done with a more narrative style of filmmaking that it sounds challenging. It's not. It's really fun. And I don't know if I would show it to kids because it is very scarring about what happens at the end. I mean, maybe that's important that as a kid, you need to have those experiences and they like kind of form who you are, but as a parent showing it to your kid in that moment, you will not be happy about what's happening. So I hope you'll check out La Guerre des Tuques. It was released by Canadian International Pictures, a Vinegar Syndrome sub-label, so it's very available on Blu-ray, and I would highly recommend checking it out, especially as an adult, because if you're around my age, it'll give you those warm Christmas feelings, nostalgia, while still having that like tinge of sadness throughout it. On that note, I want to know, did you see a Christmas film that scarred you? Was there something in a Christmas movie that just kind of like shook you to your core? I mean, for me, I have to say that like as a kid, when I saw the Santa Claus die in Tim Allen's Santa Claus, that made me ask so many questions that still haunt me to this day. But what about you? There's a lot of Christmas movies, there's a lot of weird stuff in them. What really stuck with you? Maybe scarred you, frightened you, made you question about what you were seeing? And I'll see you tomorrow with another Christmas movie.